kind of a continuance in a way, but a new story in itself.
Oh, I'd say it is. Less than 2 weeks ago, you took your family back to the campsite where you had that encounter you told us about in episode 140. Not long after sundown, you had another incident, and that's what you're here to tell us about. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk about some other things. From what I hear, a lot of changes have been made to the area where you had your encounter since you were on the show 2 weeks ago. Please tell us about those changes.
As far as the changes go, there's a lot of different directions you can go in hiking the trails. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 160 acres of forest that you travel through. They have actually taken and put boardwalk down on most of the trails, so you never have to step on dirt. It goes from boardwalk to concrete. Some of the platforms, viewing platforms for some of the higher elevations, they've put, I guess you would say, a cage wire over the boardwalk that you walk on. So not only does it have sides, it's almost like being in a zoo. You walk around and you kind of got somewhat of an enclosure between you and nature. They did a lot of different things building it up since I've been there, and I'd say that the first time I seen the place was about 5 years ago. I fell in love with it because of its natural beauty, not so much the elevation, because I didn't really go for that reason. When we go camping, we scout it out and make sure it's kid-friendly. The people that go there are nice. A lot of things go into consideration when picking a site. We picked the place because it was beautiful, man. It was absolutely gorgeous. One of the perks of going there is some beautiful water and some sinkholes. And when I say sinkholes, I don't mean, just little pines or holes in the bottom of trees. I mean, it's literal areas that would swallow a building. You can't really see the bottom to them. Some of the smaller ones that look like they were dug with a shovel, I mean, if you want to call it a sinkhole, they're visible there. To the other side where the sinkholes are, they're actually roped off with caution tape. And it has been that way since the first time we were there. Now, the first time we went there, I had no idea of what a dogman was. Never thought I would be talking about an experience that I had physically seeing it. So, anyway, the area has never been touched since. It's still got caution tape, do not enter signs. So you can walk and view the sinkholes, quote unquote, but you're only going to get a couple of feet to that direction before you have to turn around and go back the other way. And I have my own thoughts and theories to why that is and why they poured so much money in enclosing the areas that you walk around the landscape. I have some of an idea of what that would be.
You know about places around that area where you think dogmen might be holing up. What can you tell us about that?
There's areas that in broad daylight I would not venture close to. I sent you a few pictures, Vic, because I wanted to give you an idea of what I was physically seeing. This is 12 o'clock noon in Florida, man. It's hot. And you're looking over your shoulder. You don't really want to hang out in the middle of the day over there. The caution tape, yeah. The keep out tape, yeah. Don't go. But just the look of it from walking up to it tells you to go the other way. I mean, like we've spoken before, everybody has a sense about them that knows the sense of danger from children to adults. And it just fills you with a sense of danger. Now, if you veer to the right of that, you're in the most beautiful place you've ever seen. Water puddles, waterfalls, lakes. It's beautiful. It is like a postcard. If you turn to the right, you're going into a horror movie. And I believe that. I believe that's where they're at. I believe that's where they live, and I believe that's why it's roped off and it's never been worked on.
In some of those pictures that you sent me, it does look beautiful, just like you said, but other parts and places that you showed me pictures of, it's got keep out written all over it.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to stumble over there on a dark night, much less going in the daytime's enough to scare the pants off of you. It's really undescribable. It's a place that has a lot of paranormal activity. If you speak to different people, it's a place that there's been a lot of deaths there from things that were done in the past, the reputation of the place. You can talk to anybody and get a different story from every person, but every one of them points over there and says, don't go over there. The sinkholes are massive. They're dark. Bats are flying in and out of them. It's just eerie. And I was taught at a young age to steer clear of stuff that was eerie, and I try to do so.
Well, it definitely fits the eerie bill. Yeah, it's a pretty creepy looking place. Last time around, Casey, people were wondering why we didn't come out and mention the name of the place. Please address that now.
A lot of people were actually asking in the comments of the location, but I was raised, and I still am, and maybe it's not right, but I was always raised to not talk bad about people and talk bad about things. This campsite, I can honestly say I will never go back. And the reason why we went back, it was to the other side of the campsite, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I was raised not to talk bad about people or talk down on people. And I feel like if I give the location and the name of this place, a lot of people are going to go there for the negative reasons. And I said it in the first interview that I don't want anybody to not go into nature and enjoy the beauty of it. I just want them to understand and be on their toes when they do. You know, whether it's a feral hog or whatever, there's stuff out there, and it's badder than you are.
Oh, I'd say it is. And that's an admirable reason for not sharing the name of the place, by the way.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, Casey, please tell us about this experience you had this time around. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Well, this experience that we had this time around was kind of a wild experience, and the experience started with going camping during spring break. The month of March everywhere, everybody's hauling butt to come to the big cities, and everybody in the big cities hauling butt to get in the country. Anyway, we went to 11 places to go camping. 0 camper sites was available. And maybe we ran out of luck, and maybe we pushed our luck thinking that if we kept trying, something would come available. We would go on the website Reserve America every so many hours just to see if we could get a place that was available. Nothing ever was. The only place we knew we had reservations is where we previously made them before we had our first encounter at the same location. And it was a tent site, not a site to where I bought a camper to keep us away from stuff like that. So I'm saying, no, we're not going camping. My wife is agreeing with me. Until it comes time to go camping, and we have 3 kids, you know, pouting because they want to bring their buddies camping, and they don't necessarily know how serious it was. They have a feeling, and I told them, and it scared them for that time, but everybody tells you the stove's hot until you touch it, you know. So anyway, I start kind of believing my own hype, and I'm like, hey, if I get a campsite on the other side of the park, that's almost in another county. I know it's not going to be in the outdoors, and it'll be a little hike to everything, but at least we're camping. At least we're outside. At least we have a lake during the daytime, and we can have a good time. So I really took into consideration a lot of things, but unfortunately we ended up back at the same spot. Me thinking lightning wouldn't strike twice in the same place was probably the dumbest decision that I've ever made. And I've been told that by a few people. Anyway, so we're getting the campsite. We have it reserved. We call the place and tell them that we would like to switch locations. They have what they call a walk-up site, to where we can walk up to it and basically camp there. It's not as nice as the other sites. There's actually a asphalt or pavement area, and the only ground is where you set up your tent at. I mean, it's really like camping in the parking lot of a store. So anyway, we were going to do it. You know, it's marshmallow and s'mores time. We're going to have fun. We're going to enjoy ourselves. So it was me, my wife, my 3 children, and 2 of their little friends. And the first day we went, man, it was just like advertised. It was the most beautiful place on earth, and you seen the most friendly people. Everybody smiled. Everybody offered to help. There are no strangers. Everybody in there waves and says hello. It's a really nice place. And anyway, we stayed. It was beautiful. It was perfect. Perfect enough for me to let my guard down. And I'll explain that further too. I'm getting so comfortable now that it's like, hey, maybe whatever we seen was the hallucination. Maybe I was losing my mind. My wife starts chuckling, saying, yeah, don't act like that, you know, blah, 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 you know how husband and wife do. Anyway, the kids come out, and it's our last night there. And I told the kids, I said, look, guys, let's try s'mores. Let's drink some cocoa. I was pretty much bribing them to hang out under the stars because that's what we go for. And this time I messed up and brought a DVD player with a bunch of movies on it. And they wanted to go watch some new movies. Anyway, I talked them into hanging out by the fire. And the way that I talked them into it is I was like, look, we're here, baby. We're across the park. There's nothing to worry about. Everything out here better worry about us. And I'm pointing to my son and grabbing his muscle, you know. And anyway, about the time that I tell them, hey, there's nothing to worry about, not thinking about the boogers in the woods, I tell them, hey, if we were down there fishing and you caught a fish and it was so big that you needed his help, what would you do? And the other kid said, I would help him. And I said, okay, you two are fishing and you guys catch a fish and you guys need some help reeling it in. What would you do? And my daughter says, I would help him. I said, see, now everybody's fishing and it's dark. There's nothing to worry about. They kind of laughed, you know, and agreed with me. I got the marshmallow sticks out, and about that time, man, a tree, not a branch, not a twig, not a small limb, not the top of a tree. I do landscape, and I can tell when it's a dead limb falling and when it's a green limb falling. It was a tree that cracked in half, and it was green, full of chlorophyll. It was a healthy tree that snapped. And it was so loud that it was probably louder than a shotgun. My neighbor in a camper comes out and says, are you guys okay? We were like, yeah, you know, and it sounded like it was right behind our campsite. So, you know, I'm tripping out. My kids are like, keep your marshmallows. They're going in the tent. I looked at my wife and I'm trying to say, oh, it's okay. In the meantime, I ease over there and grab my pocket knife up out of my chair. And, the kids are gone. They've heard enough. They don't want any marshmallows. They could care less. So they go in the tent and play their movies, and I'm talking with my wife, and I'm like, look, man, that was a trip. At this point, I did not think it was something. I thought it was just a freak thing, a tree breaking. And I told my wife, I was like, wow, that was a trip. Talking about perfect timing, it was like something was listening to us. So probably a few more hours go by, and now it's getting a little after midnight. Me and my wife are relaxing by the fire. And the sound that I had heard the first time that I told you I had heard, that was unlike any sound that I've ever heard. If I had to say it's some demonic growl or a terrible sound. And as close as I can get to it again is, and, you know, you guys can laugh about it, but just imagine that played through an amplifier 100 times louder. So anyway, I hear that noise and I'm like, no way. And my eyes are about the size of saucers, and I look at my wife and she's looking at me, and I said, dude, that's the same noise we heard last time. And it did it again. This time it was about 50 feet from where it did it the first time. It went from the left of me to in front of me directly in the woods. And a third time to the right of me directly in the woods. And for the final time down by the lake. And I'm like, dude, this is crazy, man. I should record this. Anyway, everybody wishes they had a camera, I guess, sometimes. So we hear this noise and I'm freaking out. My wife's kind of freaking out. She's freaking out because I'm freaking out, but I'm playing it cool, you know. And I was like, maybe it was, I don't know what it is. I was like, if I hear it again, I'm going to shine this light on it. And I want you to walk back that way. If I see it, I can say what it is. So my wife went and got her keys, and she has a newer car to where it has an alarm on it, pushes a button from anywhere at all, not just a distance, the alarm will go off. So in the meantime, we're sitting there and we hear these dogs barking throughout the campsite. And my wife says to me, after a couple of more hours pass and we're still up, that's weird. You hear these dogs barking? And it was almost like all the way as far around the campground as you can get at this campsite. One dog would bark, and it was like a bigger bark. And then on the other side of the campsite, another dog would bark. And finally, the neighbor's dog that was beside us, that was in a camper, a little chihuahua, started raising Cain. It was just barking, 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 barking. And my wife looks at me, and I kind of look over behind our tent, and I was like, that's weird. So I throw some extra gasoline on the fire and get it blazing up pretty decent. And about that time, man, I would say 50 yards directly in front of me. Now, the way that this campsite is set up, if I'm sitting facing the steering wheel in a car, and you reach over and touch the passenger side dash, that's where the tent is. The wood line would be directly in front of your hood. We had a little tent going over the picnic table, and the woods were directly behind it. The fire pit is directly in front of me and my wife, and we're facing the woods. Anyway, about 50 yards from the tree line, I hear something coming through the woods. And when I say something coming through the woods, it wasn't a deer or even a bear or something that I could understand. Whatever was coming through the woods directly toward us was coming through the woods nonstop, over saplings, over trees, over whatever, like a truck, like a small truck is what you would think it was without a motor in it, because it didn't make any sound. There was no sounds except trees and ground and grass tearing up. My wife jumps up beside me. She has a big mag flashlight. I stand up. Now, as I stand up, she's to the left of me by the fire, and I'm directly behind the fire looking out in the woods. As I stand up, she takes off from the left side of me. As I go to stand up completely, she knocks me completely over on the ground. Hits me with the flashlight by accident, but either way, she's getting out of there. Has her finger on the alarm button. As I land on a stack of firewood. And I reached down and grabbed a piece of firewood, and I was so mad that I could have just busted it in my hand, it felt like. Well, I stood up and threw it directly into the woods, straight to where the sound was coming from. I didn't intend on hitting a tree, but I did. I hit a big tree that was in front of the tree line. It hit the tree, and it again sounded like a gunshot. It was loud. Pow! And as soon as the wood hit the ground, the sound stopped. It was like whatever was coming hit its brakes. It ran full speed, a 50-yard dash, and stopped directly in front of the woods to where we could not see it. So now I'm freaking out. I'm like, dude, not this again. This is the craziest thing ever. This is like Twilight Zone, man. I mean, I was really debating on even calling you and telling you this because, for one, world's dumbest campers, you know what I'm saying? For two, it was the reality. And it burned a hole in my mind for a few days until I did tell you about it. But anyway, I was like, look, gather the kids' stuff up. Now it's like 2, 3, maybe 4 in the morning. I said, gather the kids' stuff up. It's getting late. She's like, well, it's almost daylight. It'll be daylight by the time we even lay down. Let's just lay down in the tent. So I go over and grab a big lighter knot, throw it on the fire, get the fire blazing up the size of it. It was big. You probably could have seen it from outer space, if you can imagine. Fire's blazing. We go lay down in the tent. And as you can probably figure, I couldn't just fall asleep. My wife's over here snoring, and I'm barely able to go to sleep. I just closed my eyes, it felt like, for a split second. I didn't wake up and see what time it was, but a light rain had started right before we decided to lay down. Maybe it was dew and humidity falling, but it wasn't. You would have to stand outside in it to get soaked. Okay, you would have to be standing in one spot to let this rain saturate you. So anyway, I get a little sleep, a doze off, maybe I would say 45-minute-ish. I wake up and I smell wet dog. Now, it could have been a bear, a deer, a raccoon, a cat, a possum, but it was wet fur. As if you took your dog and put it in the bathtub, and anybody that's listening to this that has ever washed a dog, the smell of wet dog is the smell of wet dog. There is no other smell that smells like a wet dog. So the smell is so thick that I'd like to say you could cut it with a knife because I slept with about 5 of them. But anyway, it was so thick that it kept the tent full of the smell. And I reach over and shake my wife, and I'm like, hey, do you smell that? She's like, what? I said, do you smell that? She sniffs around and just agrees with me and goes back to sleep. So now I'm on guard. I smell wet dog, and I stayed up until the sun come up, and we gathered up our things and left. I haven't told the kids about it because, you know, the first time I told them about the incident, it sucked. It was hard to do. And the second time, I don't really necessarily have to tell them because, honestly, I didn't see anything. But we will never be back there. And I don't think that I will ever go camping again in a tent. that's my word. That's all I got, and that's what I can give you.
At this point, Casey, I'll bet most of the listeners are wondering the same thing I am. Why didn't you leave right away?
It was one of those things, man. It was so peaceful and beautiful. And this noise, I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out what this is. The next time it makes this noise, there's not going to be a next time. Because I honestly think, I'm sure a lot of people went back to the site of incidents, maybe for closure for themselves or maybe for others, but I felt like I was safe. I felt like it was the safest thing in the world because of where we were. We were almost in a part of the campground that was almost like a small town. And for something to come over there, it had to sneak behind everything that was there and come over. And I think these things are so smart that they have the capability of smelling you, finding you, and once they find you, listening to what you say. Because if I would have had a recorder, and I could have recorded what I told my kids and had them just about ready to throw some marshmallows on the fire. And then the tree break that started off the chain of events that seemed like happened back to back to back. I would have never believed it. I would have never even imagined in a million years that it could happen. But I learned my lesson, I guess you would say, the hard way. So why didn't I leave? I guess maybe, I don't know, I wanted to wait till the sun come up. What was worse? Waiting until the sun come up or waking the kids up and terrifying them and piling in a vehicle and not knowing what would have happened or whatever. So I just played it by ear and woke up the next morning and we packed up. I will say we left as soon as the sun crept up, though.
Well, I'm glad you learned your lesson and don't plan on going back. Thank goodness. You do realize a lot of people are going to be talking about you for going back, don't you?
Yeah, but like my daddy told me, I've heard worse from better people. I'm sure that a lot of people went back to the site for closure themselves, whether they went back during the day, whether they went back in a vehicle with the doors locked. I can't say that I felt threatened for my life this time. I felt safe for some reason. Maybe it was because the guard station was within, hey, I'm over here away. You know what I mean? So there's really no one reason why I went back other than there were no open sites available for the time period that I had to take my kids camping. And that's pretty much why we went.
I can see why you did it. When I found out that you had done it, though, I've got to admit, I was shaking my head thinking, what was he doing? What was he thinking? But I'm not in your situation. I'm not in your shoes. So I can't think for you. All I can do is just wish you the best whenever you do anything like that. I'm glad you got out of that situation unscathed.
Yeah, what a lot of people don't know is Vic actually called me after I wrote this to him. And I did not write it to Vic right after it happened because it's almost like me walking into a telephone pole and going and getting stitches, and then when I get out of the hospital, walking into the other side of the telephone pole. We stayed at the campground, and I can say that it's a good mile, maybe mile and a half from the other site we stayed in. And I thought maybe that would be enough to keep us safe as far as the distance. But after Vic had called me and explained to me about the distance they can travel, it was more or less like closure on, okay, yeah, all I have to do is shake my head, admit defeat, and know that I'll never be back there, period, with a camper or not.
It is amazing their ability to track people over huge distances. Distances a lot bigger than that.
Yeah, I'll never doubt anybody's story ever again. But another thing, man, I want listeners to know, these things, I think they have the capability to listen to your words. Now, that may be strange, and you may say, yeah, even a dog can hear you, but to be able to understand it with a consciousness, to be able to understand what we are saying, because as if I was in a horror movie or someone was in the woods, it played out just like that. Like they listened to the words I said. They listened and waited for my location to be at certain spots. It was weird. It was just a strange thing. It was like being watched without physically seeing somebody watching you. In the first story I told you, I felt like somebody was watching me, and then it all summed up to this creature in the first go-round at episode 140. And even since episode 140, I've went online and did a lot of research, even more research. I think I'll do it until I'm gone, just to try to get closure, to see if I can see what I saw again. You know, whether it's in another state now or whatever, or if it's in the same spot, if there's more than one. But yeah, it's a wild story, man. I wouldn't really believe it if I wouldn't have lived it. I mean, the reservations were just dangling over my head like, you're going through all this trouble and can't get anywhere. The kids are going to be upset. Just go here. And I took the bait. And now I have to live with it.
Well, one good thing I think we can take away from that last experience you had is the fact that your kids didn't even know about what had happened. If they had known about what had happened this time around, that might have put them off from the woods for their whole lives. We don't know that, but I think there's a pretty good possibility of that happening.
Yeah, I know I'm not going to know the back of my hand, and that's why I said in the first episode, man, when you have to explain to kids that monsters are real, kids have an innocence about them that is beautiful. And that innocence is gone too soon these days. So I try to do everything I can do to keep my kids as innocent as I can keep them, regardless of what it is. I want them to be kids as long as they can be kids, and I want them to enjoy life. And that's why the first episode, it was almost, it's hard to describe, but it was harder explaining to them what I had seen than the encounter almost, because they're my heart. So that was hard. So this go around, I got them up, we got out of there. There were no hollering, no alarm went off. Daddy had a bump on his head from a flashlight. We laughed about that, but that was about it.
Well, I can understand why you explaining what had happened the first time around to your kids was so hard, because it only makes sense that when you're explaining what happened to them, you don't want to explain it in a way that's going to make it even worse for them than it has to be.
That's correct.
Yeah, that wouldn't be easy. I'm a little fuzzy on something. How long ago did you say it was when you and your family had that first encounter?
The first encounter, I would say easily a year ago. I remember specifically going around Easter. So we were there, we stayed, we went on while we were there and made the reservations for this last March trip. And who knows what the future holds or whatever, and at that time I had no idea. But we made the reservations a year ago, and the first encounter was a year ago. Maybe a little longer, give or take a few days, but I would say a good year.
It's been quite a while then.
Yeah, it wasn't fresh in my head, man, but even as I listened to my own episode, it kind of made my palms sweat. A lot of things come back to mind about that time, and the hardest part is not being able to understand it. I don't understand what they were after. I don't understand what their intentions were. I believe if they were going to do harm, they would have. And the reason why I keep saying they is because above all, I believe there's more than one.
Talking about what you just mentioned, did it sound like there might have been more than one creature out there in the woods that night?
If not, this joker was huge. I mean, I would say that it was the sound of a pack of dogs running through the woods. I'm not saying there were 7 or 8, but I'm saying that, man, if you were to stand up and put 10-foot long 2x4 in your arms and run through a cornfield, knocking over 4 or 5 rows of corn on each side of you, that's how it sounded, with the stomps and steps. And as soon as it got to the tree line, I threw the wood and it hit the tree. I don't think that stopped it. I think maybe me yelling and the neighbor's dog raising Cain, I believe that may have opened its eyes. I don't know. Maybe it was just there to scare me. Maybe it was there to say, hey, you think your first encounter was crazy, nobody will believe this. I don't know. I have no idea.
It probably is what was going on, because if it wanted to come in and take you out, there wasn't anything to stop it from doing that.
Yeah, me and my wife both were standing there. She's on the other side of the tent by the back door. The back door of the tent is put directly with access to the car. You unzip the back, you're in the back seat. I already set that up. So we were both standing there waiting to see something. Whether we seen something look at us growling, whether something ripped our tent shack or whatever you want to call it that goes over the picnic table down, I was waiting on a monster to come out of the woods. And nothing ever did. I mean, I didn't even hear it run back into the woods. So whatever it was stealthy. I'll say that. And like my first encounter, I visually seen it, and as soon as I seen it and it took off, that was it. It isn't like I followed it at a distance. Within seconds, it was a memory, and a pretty vivid, scary one at that.
Oh, I'm sure it did leave memories for you. How could it not? How close did you say the closest campers were to you when you heard those sounds in the woods?
Well, I would say that when we got there to set up the first night that we stayed there one full night, and it was beautiful, perfect. And the second night, which was the last, we were out of there like swimwear. Anyway, when we got there, it was about an hour before dark. The sun was setting. I actually took pictures of the sunset on the way in. And the reason why it was that late is because we had spent up to the last minute trying to find another campground to go to. We probably, and this is no exaggeration, made 50 phone calls. I beat every trail and path available to go to, and there was nothing. So we were stuck with it. Either go or don't. So we did. And when we went, we set up. The neighbor to us was approximately 20 foot away, and that don't sound like very far in case of an emergency. But yeah, I'd say 20 foot behind me, and probably the guard station that you drive through to get there was another, say, 45 foot to the other side. Open view, nothing but concrete and asphalt until behind us.
It sounds like he had company right up on you then.
Yeah, and that was the whole idea. If we're going to go and camp at the edge of the park. If you're camping and you see a gator on the side of the lake, the next time you go to that lake, I bet you'll show up on the other side of the lake, unless that's your thing, then you might go hang out with it. But people tend to avoid dangerous things. And I went this time strictly for my kids to have a good time. I did not go fishing. I did not do anything myself. I went strictly for my kids to swim in the lake, to fish themselves, to play, to look at nature, to see the sights that were available to be seen, and have a good time. That's what I went for. That was the whole reason in going. The whole reason we went there was for them. And people may say it's crazy because of the first encounter, but if these things are going to come out where it came out at or ran up to, it never came out. It just ran up to the tree line, and I was waiting on it to come out. Or I say I was waiting on it to come out. It might have looked like I sat in a chair full of Hershey Kisses if it did come out. But I am positive that they were listening to what I was saying, because I was giving my kids a motivational speech, you know. The boogeyman looks under his bed for me at night. And it was like it was saying, oh, really? Okay. And then the chain of events started. So, yeah, it went from a perfect scenario as I pictured it being first day to the last night there. I mean, even to the sun, right at sundown, it was perfect, man. All except them roasting marshmallows and drinking hot chocolate.
Does the boogeyman really look under his bed for you at nighttime, or what?
If he doesn't, he better start, because he's starting to make me mad. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I could see. It would have been a great time if that whatever it was didn't come back and ruin the fun. I've got no doubts it was a dog man. I mean, after that first experience you had, what else could it be? But it's really a shame. It would have been a great time.
Yeah, they still had fun, man. They have no idea. They were excited about it. They were bragging about their little fish they caught. We do a lot of catch and release and a couple of bass, and I teach them how to make little fish traps out of basically trash, a little water bottle. We cut it, make a little minnow trap, and they catch minnows and let them go. I mean, it's just a wonderful time, man. I mean, for innocence and watching your kids have fun and not have a worry in the world is priceless. There's no money that can buy that. And they did. They had a good time. They had exactly what I intended them to have. And if I would have woke them up and told them, come on, let's go, we're going to get eat, I mean, I imagine that would have changed quick. They'd probably still be under the blankets in the house right now.
Oh, I'm sure they would.
We're still going to go camping, but it's probably going to be in the backyard or the front yard. We'll probably go camping, man. I'm going to look into buying a piece of property and having it just for us to do these type of things out. To buy a piece of rural property, maybe lakefront. It just varies, but on on the other side of town from that. You can be sure of that.
Well, that'd be nice to have your own camping spot.
Yeah, we've discussed it. And I even went to the courthouse to look for leases and everything with the hunting season that just ended here and everything that's going on. They didn't have anything that what I would call kid friendly. I like to have a good time too, but I like to keep my kids safe and away from drinking and guns and stuff like that. And unfortunately, sometimes the best place to go is a state park where all of that is monitored to where they can have a great time and be children. You can do all that stuff at the house. I don't understand why people like to go and show out, but anyway, to each his own.
Yeah, it is a shame, but that is. How far did you say that place is from the nearest developed area? I think you addressed that on the last show you did, episode 140, but I forgot if you did mention that.
Well, it depends on which way you go. If you go from my house to there, which is basically through the woods, and you come out at the entrance 45 miles from me, and I'm 22 miles from the city. If you're there going to the next developed place, I mean, like I say, again, it varies. There's small subdivisions in between, but 30 miles, 15 miles, depending on what size that you're speaking of. I mean, there's big plantation homes and stuff like that around it. And some of the park rangers actually have homes on the outside of it. But there's nothing really built up until you get to the other side of the city. And that's a pretty decent little trek.
Yeah, I'll bet it is. And it sure sounds to me like there's a lot of competition for camping spots where you live.
Yeah, there is. I mean, like I said, it's a rarity to find a place that has a children's area, a little park, pavilion, bathrooms and family bathrooms, a swimming hole, a fishing hole. I mean, you go on these state parks and you read them, you can go hiking and camp, but you can't fish, you can't swim. I mean, the mosquitoes down here get so big they can pull your pants leg up and bite you on the kneecap. So, you want to jump in the lake. So we try to go somewhere that has all them amenities, buddy, and everybody's trying to get there.
Did your wife give you a hard time for taking the family back there after having that second experience?
After it was said and done or prior to going?
Either one.
Well, prior to going, we were both on the fence. It was like, she's the one that brought it up to me. We still have these reservations, and I was like, I don't care. And as time got shorter, I was just confident that something would come open for 2 days. But I mean, I guess in the middle of March, I'm not a spring breaker, but I guess everybody goes at that time. I don't know. There was nowhere to go, so I said, the heck with it. We'll go and we'll bite the bullet and we'll be right here at the officer station. If something happens, they'll have surveillance on our tails, And anyway, after it was said and done, she just, like me, it's almost unbelievable. And you had given us, actually, when I wrote you, she didn't even know I had wrote you. And I had wrote you and kind of give you a summary of what happened. And she was still in the shock stages of not denial, but dude, this is crazy. Like the episode that you told me to listen to, I went and listened to, and it was actually a 2-part episode. And I listened to the first part of it, and it was almost identical to ours. And then the next episode was similar too. It was wild. It really was. If I would have listened to that episode first, I would have known. You know what I mean? But that was a good episode. I believe it's him and his wife or his girlfriend. But yeah, that was a good episode. And what was trippy about it is I text you all this, or some of it, and then I listened to the episode, and like 40% is identical. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he tripped and fell, but he did it on his own accord, and I got cracked side the head with a flashlight, so I guess it was similar in that way.
Yeah, there were a lot of similarities. There was a really nice lady, Pamela. That's not his wife. That's just a good friend of his. Pamela was featured on those 2 shows with Kirk as well.
Yeah, that's what it was. I want the viewers to know that you actually called me, and I want to say consoled me. You were like, dude, it'll be okay. I understand. I could sit here and ask you why you did it, but you did it. You went, you're out, and you're okay. That's all that matters. Now, I want you to go listen to these 2 episodes and then let me know what you think. you were really there for support, and I appreciate that. I want fans of your show to know that. You're a good person, buddy.
Well, thanks for the good words, but yeah, that's what I do. That's what I'm here for. I just wanted to try and help you get better after that second experience.
I think I've said it before, man, but it was like getting struck by lightning and then going standing in the same spot, getting struck twice. Lightning doesn't strike twice, I tell. It definitely did. And, it was the farthest thing from my mind. Like I say, it was trippy, man. It was crazy. It was an eye-opener, and it was different. It was everything that you can describe as crazy as it could be is what it was. And it was definitely a learning experience. And it was the one that gave me my degree, because now I'll never, ever go back there. I don't care if they have free camping there. They won't have me there.
Yeah, I'm glad you did learn that lesson. After these experiences, your wife decided to research dogmen on her own, and when she did, she found out about another woman who had an encounter in that very same park. Please tell us what she found out about that woman's encounter.
My wife, it was like a light bulb going off in my head. They had put all this money into this property, but they never fixed the area where you can walk around the sinkholes. Like, they were avoiding you from being able to go view them. Like, they knew what was out there, especially with the enclosed docks. So this lady goes, and she's planning on doing some future endeavors as far as hiking the Appalachian trails. And she said that she found this state park, and she wanted to go there, and she knew that if she could hike this state park, that she'd have it pretty much whooped. If she couldn't, that it was going to whoop her. Well, upon walking around it, she got about a mile into her trip and said she felt something following her out of the corner of her eye. She said she took a step and it would take a step. And she would speed up and it would speed up. So finally she stopped, and to her horror, she turned around and looked, and it leaned out from behind a tree. And she said the only description that she could give of it, it looked like it was wearing some type of hood. And that was just in the last couple of days that was in the news. And it was actually a link that someone had sent my wife after hearing about our last camping trip. Because a lot of people here, they want to go to these places until they really find out about it. They find out the bad side of things and they don't want to go. And that's honestly why I didn't want to name the place, because there's a lot of people that aren't going there because of me. And I don't want that. I'm not saying I want somebody to go get hurt, but I want everybody to enjoy nature. Just be safe. Keep an eye and an ear out.
I wasn't there, so I don't know this is what happened to her, but most canine-type dogmen have a pronounced hump on their backs. Maybe she saw that dogman's hump sticking up over its head and mistook that hump for some kind of a hood. Again, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened for sure. I don't know what she saw, but that is a possibility. If you go to the new website, dogmanencounters.com, and look at the dogman on the homepage, you'll notice how you can see its hump over the top of its head. If the lighting is just right, maybe you would mistake that hump for being some kind of a hood.
Yeah, that sounds very credible. I mean, really, if you think about it, the last thing you're going to be really, really, really paying attention to is what type of hood it's wearing. You know what I mean? You're going to be staring at its facial features. And she said that she seen two big eyes, and it looked like it was wearing some type of hood. So it very well could have been that. But I definitely heard the same sound that I had heard the first time, the second time. And when that happened, you could have heard a pin drop. It got my attention.
That really does cut down on the possibilities of what it could have been out there in the woods that night.
Yes, it does. It kind of narrows my theory down to what it was, and I honestly believe that it was just kind of listening to me and messing with me. It was letting me know that it was boss, and I could act tough all I wanted to, but I think it had my scent, my smell, and wanted to play a few games, I guess you could say. Because if it wanted dinner, it would have kept coming. I do believe that.
Oh yeah, just wanted to intimidate you. It sure sounds to me like mission accomplished.
Yeah, it definitely did. Did a great job.
Yeah, I'd say it did. Before we have you give your closing comments, Casey, I hear your youngest daughter thinks I'm a dog man. Is that true?
Yeah, she just thinks it's the cutest thing. She tells everybody that she sees that her daddy is on Dogman Counters. She doesn't pronounce it quite right, but it's even cuter that way. But yeah, we talked to Dog Man Counters, and he's cute. He's a cute doggy. And my older two, also, I showed them the picture, and they kind of looked at me and laughed and knew that I was pulling their leg. But when I showed them your picture of your dog man, my baby daughter really thinks that's what you look like. And my kids are taught not to make fun of people. And they were talking so sweet about you, Vic, so you don't have to worry about them, I guess.
Well, they are great kids. Before we did that first show, I talked to your kids, and I got a really good feel for the great job you did raising them. I'm not surprised, though. I could tell right from the bat that you're a great dad.
I sure do appreciate that, Vic. You know, a lot of the comments on the first video were, why didn't you get your kids out of there? Why didn't you this? And why didn't you that? You know, if I were going to be dead, I would have been dead. I don't think that it was a life or death situation. You know, it scared the tar out of me, I guess, as anybody. That's why we come on here and we have this type of counseling, this type of outlet to go on. But I don't want anybody to think that I'd ever let anything happen to my kids. I mean, honestly, I may not be bad, but bad don't mess with me. They'd have to come through Daddy first. That's a given.
Oh, I can tell, yeah, you'd do anything to protect those kids, so anybody who would think that you would allow anything to happen to them intentionally, yeah, that's just crazy. But having said that, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I'd like to say thanks for you, Vic. I'd like for everyone to go. If you haven't already done it, then you need to go do it. Download the Dog Man app and listen to the shows commercial free. The new episode airs every Friday night. I think it's 9 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. And that's pretty much it, Vic.
I need to put you on the payroll. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I'd like to give a shout out to my uncle, if you don't mind. My uncle Danny Brandon, he passed away the other day, and I'd like to say that we love him and all of our family. And I appreciate you letting me come on, Vic, and tell the rest of my story. There's still a lot of stuff that's not told, you know, including the location, but I hope I give the viewers a decent picture and a decent idea of everything that happened.
Just like first time around, you painted a great picture again, so yeah, don't worry about that. And about your uncle, God bless him. I'm so sorry to hear about that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, thanks again so much for sharing that experience with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic. You have a great night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dog Man Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest wishes to remain anonymous, so I'm just going to refer to him as Chaz during this interview. Chaz, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vic. Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming and doing the show. I appreciate it. Chaz, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, let's see. Currently, I live in a small fishing village in Alaska. I'm 63 years old. I'm retired due to health reasons. Prior to retiring, I was basically working in the construction trades for the past 40 or so years, and I'm a retired electrician, and I worked in the marine industry here and doing marine electric and doing industrial and residential projects, and also remote wilderness lodges. I developed and built off-grid codependent power systems for that. I've raised a whole passel of kids and just enjoying life.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. From talking with you about all the things you've done in your life in the pre-interview, Chaz, if people lived half the life you've lived, they'd be doing something, I'm telling you.
I've had people tell me that, and I always feel like I probably should have done more.
I don't see how you could have, to be honest with you. When you were growing up, what kind of interest did you have in monsters and things that go bump in the night?
Well, a lot. I mean, I collected all the trading cards from the monster movies. I read tons of comic books, of course. I was pretty much your typical kid, and I actually built all the, I think it was Revell that made the movie monster models, and that was a big deal for me, building hot rods and movie monsters. And so I had a whole collection sitting on my dresser of the Wolf Man and Dracula, Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and yeah, so yeah, I was real interested in that. I would also try and watch. My parents were pretty strict, though. I grew up in the Bible Belt, and they don't call that for nothing. And my mom was, in particular, my dad was a little more relaxed about it, but my mom, she was pretty strict about what I could watch or couldn't watch. So a lot of times I'd stay up and kind of sneak out in order to watch what my dad was watching without getting discovered. But I had a big interest in anything strange or unusual, any kind of science fiction or scary movie that had to do with things like Wolfmen. And so, I mean, those are probably some of my favorite movies to this day, are the werewolf movies. I always found them fascinating. And I do believe that it was because of this incident that we're going to talk about that happened to me when I was a kid.
Well, after you had that experience, like you just mentioned, when you were 8, it's only natural, I guess, that you would be fascinated with the topic. But yeah, that's something, like you said, we'll get into later on. You've only shared the details of your encounter with a handful of people, even though your encounter happened, like I said, when you were 8. Why'd you decide to come forward and share it on the show with us tonight?
Well, I became an avid listener a couple of months back, and I've listened to a lot of the shows that are on YouTube and read some books about the Michigan Dogman, and it was that kind of epiphany that I became familiar with, that there was other people out there who had seen this sort of thing, which I never, ever had heard of from anyone until the advent of the internet and YouTube, which is how I learned about any books that were out there. And it was something that I just had never heard of before. I'd heard about people having seen Bigfoot, for instance. But at that point in time, I didn't know anyone who had seen what I had seen. And when I had seen it, I just really didn't know what to make of it. I really didn't. I tried to understand it through the eyes of an 8-year-old, and I wasn't a very worldly 8-year-old. I pretty much spent my time playing baseball, riding my bike, and going on adventures with my friends in our neighborhoods and on the farm that I grew up on. You know, I was pretty much just your average typical kid who really didn't know much other than the world that he was immersed in. So it was kind of a hard one for me to comprehend. Fortunately, I had my grandmother, and if I hadn't have had her in my background, she was actually instrumental in me being able to actually accept it just by being the person who she was. She was an incredible human being. She was a quarter-blood Indian. So she was 1/4 Oglala Sioux. Not only was she that, she was also Irish English, and she had grown up in the hills of Kentucky, and so she had had a more even unusual life, I believe, than what I had. And it was her sharing of her stories from her childhood and some of the things that she had witnessed that helped prepare me for that. And as a result of that, I always felt like I walked away from that with less emotional baggage than I would have had otherwise.
I don't care how old you are, it's never a good age to have a dogman encounter, but when you're 8, yeah, that just makes it that much worse. That's horrible. Before you tell us about your encounter, Chaz, please tell us about the place where it happened.
Well, I grew up in the state of Illinois, in Will County, on a parcel of land that my father had purchased from my grandfather that was directly adjacent to the 100-acre farm that my grandfather worked. That had been in our family for quite a long time. The farmhouse on the farm was actually built in the 1850s. And my great-great-grandfather, he was a preacher man. And that farmhouse was actually part of a series of, what would you call it, entry points for the Underground Railroad prior to the Civil War, and just after also for former slaves. And also, even though the Civil War came and went, slaves had plenty of problems in those days, even in the aftermath of the Civil War. And so he was a firm believer in abolition. And so he fought in the Civil War on the side of the Union Army as a captain with a distinguished career. And then went back to being a preacher man, living on this farm and doing what he did. So the farm's been around for a long time. It is located just south of a creek that runs through it. There's woodlands on it. It's quite a bit different now than it was when I was a kid, because that entire area south of Chicago has really grown up. You know, at the time that we're talking about when this incident occurred, there was a population of about 3,000 in that township. And then prior to that, during the Depression, my family had essentially owned the majority of that property, if one can say that you can actually own property. Originally, it was all belonged to the Indians, but at some point, my great-great-grandfather had purchased all that land, 10,000 acres, and then my great-grandfather was forced to sell it during the Depression. And so all they ended up keeping was a 100-acre farm. And then they lease farmed for other landowners in the area. One of the reasons that I'm kind of keeping my privacy about that is I still have a lot of family members that live there, and I don't want to cause them any kind of distress in telling this story. So
I understand why you'd want to do that, and as always, that's not a problem. All right, Chaz, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Well, like I said, my father had built a house upon a piece of land that he had bought from my grandfather that was directly adjacent to the farm and directly west of the farmhouse, the main farmhouse, by about 200 feet. And there was a number of buildings on the farm itself and several large barns and the equipment sheds, and all these also dated back into the 1800s. And then there was basically lots of fields and whatnot. And so where our northern edge of the property butted up to was essentially a fence line on that little same road that the main farmhouse was on. We had a lot that was probably, I know our backyard was at least 70 feet from the north edge of the house to the boundary line. And the lot itself was probably 120 feet wide or so, maybe 100 feet wide. So the house was essentially a ranch-style house that sat upon a finished basement that went about 3/4 of the way below ground. So the main portion sat about 4 foot above grade, all of which was situated at the front of the property, which is higher than the rest of the parcel. That slopes lower in the elevation by about 5 to 7 feet towards the north edge, which was defined by that fence line. And also that was the enclosure where my grandfather kept about 70 to 80 fish at that time. A recently built enclosure, about 12,000 square feet. about 120 by 100 foot enclosure, which he had built because of problems that they were having. But for the most part, they were crop farmers, growing mostly corn, soy, and wheat, having given up on raising sheep because of loss of livestock. But in those days, they were just beginning to try raising sheep. So that led up to what was going on the farm at the time. So I think at the time of the incident, I'm pretty certain by recollection and by everything that I was 8 years old. And I lived in the house in a bedroom where I slept, me and my brother slept, was in the northeast corner of the house that faced onto the backyard. And we had two windows in there, and one of them was on the north wall, about 3 feet in from the eastern wall, and there was another window about 2 feet from the north wall facing east, so I could actually see my grandparents' farmhouse from there. And from the other window, I could look out and see the backyard, which, by the way, had about 5 or 6 trees in it. Crab apple trees. I think we had 2 apple trees, and a crab apple tree, and I think a maple tree. And they weren't really big. They were fair size, medium size. But this particular night was more than likely, according to my figuring, either mid-April or mid-May. I can be pretty sure about that because of the phase of the moon, the fact that it was between a half to three-quarter moon. So where I was in the bedroom, I had the bed was actually laid out east to west, and the headboard of the bed sat underneath the eastern window and alongside the northern window. And I was in the habit, and I still am, of sleeping with the curtains drawn close. Each window had curtains which came to about an inch above the windowsill. So there was this little gap there that I used to like to peer out from. But I would keep the windows themselves open about 4 to 6 inches to receive the benefit of fresh air while sleeping, as was the custom of my father and my grandfather. And my grandfather knew this and had recently asked me to keep my eyes and ears open since they had found some sheep that had been slaughtered in the fields in the months before. And they had fenced in and were currently keeping the sheep in that enclosure, which bordered up against the backside of one of the larger barns. And so where I was in that room, I was able to see partially into the enclosure, out into the field, that area that was fenced, in between the trees, which were spaced about 30 feet apart, 20, 30 feet apart, and scattered throughout the yard. So I had a somewhat good view of what was going on, but not an overall view, just only on the south and the west section of that enclosure. But he had asked me to keep my ears and eyes open to see if I saw anything, knowing that I slept there and that I slept with the windows open. Now, there's a lot of wildlife that came through there, like pheasant, grouse, quail, fox, weasel, rabbit. Once we even caught a badger in our yard. Actually, we tried to catch him, and he got away because he shredded everything that we tried to catch him with. Well, my father and his crew tried to catch him with. But at the same time, people, when they had been in the fields, they knew that there was a pack of wild dogs that they would see out in the fields. And so at the time, he was feeling like it was these wild dogs that were doing this to the sheep. So, anyways, I think that night, it was the noise that woke me up more than anything. And I had heard the sheep bleating, and I instantly woke up, and I remembered that I was supposed to look and see what was going on if I heard that noise. I raised my head up and peered out under the curtain, that little 1-inch gap, through the open window, through the screen, into the backyard and beyond the fence. And I saw right away that the sheep were definitely, all of them were milling about as if they were trying to get away from something. And they were kind of going in this elliptical circle almost and running back and forth, but staying crowded over to the southeastern edge of the enclosure. It was about, I think, a 12,000 square foot enclosure. And as I was watching that, trying to peer and see if I could see dogs in the pen with them, I noticed something standing in between where I was and about 30 feet down below me, which was probably about 5 to 6 feet lower in elevation due to the slope of the backyard. I noticed what appeared to be a figure standing behind one of the trees. Now, it was hard to get a good look at it right then because it was in the shadow in a place where I couldn't see it really well. And so it just looked like the black figure of a man. And I wasn't sure about that, and I'm looking at it, and as I looked at it, it stepped forward. And as it stepped forward, the first thing I thought was, wow, what's this guy doing in our backyard? And it's pretty late. And at the time, I didn't exactly know what time it was, but judging now from my remembrances of how the way the light was filtering through the yard at one angle, and knowing that I was on this axis in the way that the moon goes, I'm pretty sure that it was somewhere after midnight, because the moonlight was coming down a bit from the left and from behind me. So as I was looking at this thing, I couldn't see it real well, but I knew one thing, that it was all in black. I thought it was a man dressed all in black. And then my initial impression was that this thing had some kind of hat on. So I kept staring at it, and it took a couple of steps forward out of deep shadow into much less shadow and into partial moonlight coming through the branches of the trees. And when I saw what it was, I was paralyzed. Just absolutely, just couldn't believe what I was seeing. Had the hardest, and for years, had the hardest time trying to understand what this thing was. And it wasn't until I actually got a chance to listen to some other people's experiences that started putting it in perspective for me. I mean, I was convinced with my 8-year-old brain that this thing was what I could only call as a werewolf. I wasn't even sure to call it a wolfman because it didn't look very much like the wolfman model that I had of Lon Chaney sitting on my dresser. It was different from that. So I was looking at it. It was moving forward, and a couple of things struck me as really odd that made it difficult for me to wrap my mind around it. One of those things was the fact that it looked like it was walking on high heels because it seemed to be moving on the balls of its feet. It seemed to have two knees, so to speak, in its legs. One knee that bent forward and one knee that bent back that was lower down above where the ankle would have been. And so I just didn't know what that was or what that meant. I'd never seen any kind of bipedal creature, still haven't to this day, that does that other than maybe, a kangaroo or something. But as I was looking at it, and it was slowly moving, and it was slowly panning its vision. So its head was, when I got out into the light, I could see that it wasn't a hat that it had on, but that it had fur and ears on top of its head. And the fur was dark black, like kind of a coal black, and it wasn't shaggy, it was short. So its hair reminded me a lot of some kind of Labrador or something, only a little thicker than that, like each hair was thicker, but not real long. And I'd have to say it stood about, just from my kid perspective, 6'3", 6'6", maybe 7 foot. I don't want to say any bigger than that, which led me to some later on conclusions. But at the time, I didn't know what I was looking at. It had an eye shine. The eyes were greenish, but later on in the encounter, when it turned towards me more, the color went from green to yellow. So I'm sitting there, and it's moving with such stealth and intensity that I just felt like it had a purpose, like it was heading somewhere and it was paying attention. And it stopped and peered east towards the farmhouse, and it was carefully scanning the horizon, trying to see what was going on. Now it was continuing now to move its head towards me, and before it got all the way turned towards me, I ducked down because I was afraid that it might see me through the gap there. And I waited, I don't know how long, 30 seconds, 45 seconds maybe, and figured I'd carefully go back up and peer again, and it was still there, having taken maybe another step forward. When it was moving, speaking of which, when it was moving, it had two arms, and I couldn't see its paws or whatever you want to call its hands very well because they were curved inward, like a semi-fist or like a slightly closed hand. But its arms were bent and its elbows were near its side, and when it moved, when it stepped forward with its right foot, the right arm would move forward with that. And when it moved with its left foot forward, the left arm would move with that, staying at that, almost like the position that if you just hold your hands out, not straight out at your shoulder, but down about where your elbow makes a 90-degree bend. I was trying to look at them because I didn't understand what I was seeing. At first, when I looked at it, I thought it was a guy. And I actually honestly thought, this guy looks like a guy in a tuxedo. Because it looked like it had some kind of coat on, the way the fur went. But then as it came out of the shadow and more into the light, I could see that it wasn't a coat, a black coat. It was actually fur. And the thing on its head was actually its ears and the fur on the top of its head. And this is when I got a better look at its face. Back then, I didn't know too much about dogs and breeds, although later on in life, I got to see a lot more different types of dogs and whatnot, especially when I moved to Alaska. And it reminds me of, if I can use what I know now, it looks like a Malamute's face. Only instead of having hair on the extended portion that's considered the snout and the mouth, it had a leathery type. I don't know how to say it. It was like this. It was a blacker black than the fur in some spots, and in other spots it wasn't. But it was extremely muscular. It had really defined thighs, a broad V-styled chest. The arms weren't super large, but they were defined, and you could see the definition underneath the fur. And the inner side of the arm, like if you look at the inside of your arm that's on the same side as your palm, that had that same leathery look to it that the torso did, which looked like burnished leather, not like polished shoe leather, but like if you were to have the raw leather hide and buff it with a cloth or something, it would have a kind of a flat, almost a satin appearance, but very tough, very strong looking. And very defined. You could see every striation in the abdomen and in pectoral muscles on the chest. Now, I'm looking at this, and when I first looked at it, I thought that was a vest of some sort. And then once it came more into the light, I realized, oh my God, that's like some kind of part of the body. So at this point, I was just sitting there trying to make sense of what I was seeing and really looking at it and looking at the nose. It had teeth. It had fangs, but not big fangs like I later on became accustomed to seeing in werewolf movies, like dog soldiers. So probably half the size of the fangs that you'll see on the creations that they used for that movie. But still, definitely fangs, and definitely larger, slightly larger than, like, say, on a full-grown German Shepherd. And it did actually look, the face actually did look, well, I've actually come close here in Alaska to wolves, and the face did look very wolf-like, but even more in between a Malamute and a wolf. But the teeth especially looked more wolf-like than you see on a Malamute. And then it moved forward, but it moved forward with grace, not like it was shaky, because I was thinking, why is it standing like it's wearing high heels? Because I saw that's the way the foot seemed to be positioned. And I never quite figured that out, of course, until much later, probably this year, listening to your show and looking at more pictures and that, and realized that that's some kind of anomaly of that leg of that creature. That's how those legs are built, like they're double jointed or something. So at this point, it had moved forward into the light, and the sheep were going crazy. And this thing was not paying attention to the sheep. And that was one of the things that really was like a big question that I had. How come the sheep are going crazy when this thing doesn't seem to be in the same enclosure with them? And I was looking at the sheep, and they weren't looking at this thing. They were looking at something else that was in the pen, in the enclosure area. So I had that question. I never saw anything in the enclosure, but I just could see the way the sheep were reacting, the way they were moving about. And years later, as I thought about it with an adult mind, I believe that there was something else in that enclosure. What it was, I don't know. I didn't see it. But at that point, I shifted as I was looking at the sheep and at the creature walking and looking past. I shifted in the bed and I made a creak. And right then that thing swiveled his head and looked straight at me. And the minute I made that sound, I dropped. I mean, I saw it swivel straight at me. I knew it was looking directly at me. And I just dropped down below the window and just froze. Tried to stay as quiet as I could for about, I was like sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes. And the only thing that made me get back up was the fact that this thing looked, for all intents and purposes, that it was going towards my grandmother's house, my grandfather's and grandmother's farmhouse. So I was like, oh, man. And so I got back up after about 2 or 3 minutes. I don't know how much time actually passed. Could have been as little as a minute, could have been as much as 3. Peered out carefully. This time I was a little more towards the corner of the window to the left, because I figured it had been moving forward and I wanted to see if it had traveled. Wasn't sure whether or not it had spotted me because I had an excellent hiding spot to see it from. And I couldn't see anything. And I looked and looked and looked, but I only looked, as I thought about this over the years, back then I figured this thing was just going to keep slowly moving forward. And it should have been somewhere there in and amongst the several trees that it would have had to pass through to get onto there was actually a dirt road on the other side where our property had butted up to grandfather's place, and that ended there, and there was a corn crib over there, and so it was kind of wide open there, and I couldn't see anything, and I waited in case it had ducked behind a tree and it was waiting to come out, and I waited what I thought was an appropriate amount of time, and then I moved on the bed over to the other window, carefully, quietly, as much as I could, and started scanning the immediate vicinity, all the trees that were, and I looked to my right, looked to my left, saw the corn crib, saw the trees, and carefully tried to, because originally when I first seen it, it was standing behind this tree. So I looked at every outline of every tree, and at this point, from where the moon was, this was pretty good vision. This was much better vision from that direction, looking towards the east, because the moon was back behind me. So I kept staring, tried to adjust my eyes, looked as much as I could, because I was really concerned about this thing was going to my grandparents' farmhouse. And I couldn't see anything. I could see the trees, I could see the shape. I should have been able to see this thing if it had been there. Now as I think back, I mean, this thing was powerful enough that it could have leapt into a tree, for all I know. So I must have spent about 15 minutes trying to see if it had continued or if it had taken off. My young mind, I ended up thinking, oh, this thing got scared when it heard the noise and it left back the way it had came, because I couldn't see it in the other direction. And so this made perfect sense to me. And I thought about going to wake up my dad, and I thought, man, I'm going to get in trouble if I do go wake him up. My mom is going to be upset. She's not going to let me watch any kind of scary movies, or it was going to ruin my childhood. That was the impression I got, that if I said anything, no one would believe me, and I just have nothing but grief because of it. So just slumped down in bed, crawled under the covers, pulled the covers over my head, and I instantly slept. I was tired. That amount of focus and concentration was far beyond anything I'd ever attempted or pulled off at that point in my life. And woke up the next morning, and first thing I thought of when I woke up, and I thought about what I'd seen the night before, and I started thinking about it, started going, was it real? Did it really happen? And I went in the backyard, looked around, seeing if I could see any kind of footprints, or actually checked the trees, see if there was any fur on the trees. Didn't find anything, and decided to essentially to keep my mouth shut about the whole thing, and just kept it kind of close to the vest and mentioned it occasionally, told almost every member of my immediate family, my children and my partner, and told them. Some of them believed me, some of them didn't. I don't think any of them really took it super seriously, but they did listen patiently. I think my oldest son was the one who kind of had the hardest time believing it, and he would say a few things and kind of look at me like, surely this had to have been some kind of misunderstanding of some sort. And he still doesn't like it when I bring it up and mention it to him, so I don't. But like I say, I had this incredibly loving grandmother who told me plenty of stories that were of this kind of nature, of unusual things that she had witnessed in the woods down in Kentucky. And I felt okay about it. And I never told her, never told my grandfather, though the next day they did find some dead sheep in the pen. And they wouldn't let me see them. I wanted to see them. At that age, they weren't about to let me see them, especially with my mom and my grandma around. My grandpa had asked me, I can't remember exactly, but I do believe that he asked me if I had heard anything or seen anything. And I remember just dumbing up about it because I just felt like no one's going to believe me. So I didn't say anything. That's pretty much what happened.
Even though your grandma was open to strange things, you said you never told her about what you had seen that night. Why was that?
Well, I didn't have the feeling that this thing had evil intent. Like, I was debating when it was heading towards the farmhouse that if it continued in that direction, I was going to wake my dad and try and get him to call Grandma and Grandpa and let them know what was happening. But since I didn't see this thing continue on, and I looked hard enough and long enough to convince myself whether or not I was accurate or not, I don't know. But at that age, I was pretty certain that this thing had not continued on towards the farm, so my grandmother was not in danger. And I just didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to mention it. I just felt like if I did that, it would be the wrong thing to do. And I just had that feeling. And I don't know why. My grandmother would share those sort of things with me, no problem. But I was just 8, and I know that even prior to building that house, we had lived in the farmhouse with my grandparents, and my mom had taken me to see, I think it was Sleeping Beauty, and they had that witch in Sleeping Beauty, and after that, I just couldn't sleep alone. I think it must have been 5 years old or something, and I just cried and screamed. I wanted her to leave the door open. She closed the door to the room, and I cried and screamed. And it caused a big ruckus that I was not to be allowed to see scary things, even like Sleeping Beauty, And so I'm pretty sure that was the main reason. The fact that that episode of me getting scared and not wanting to be left alone in a room with the door closed was what backed me off from mentioning it to my grandma. I still think about that. When I think of the concept of telling him, I was into doing it if that thing was moving towards. Now, after everything I know, that thing probably did move on and past that farmhouse. I don't know. Maybe it did take off the other way. But at that age, being 8, I just didn't have a clue what was really happening or how dangerous that could have been. And also the main fact that while I was watching this thing did not strike me as evil. It struck me as powerful. It struck me as something that I couldn't even comprehend what it was. I did not know what it was. I couldn't even call it a wolfman because it did not look like the Lon Chaney's wolfman. It didn't look like that. It had a bodybuilder's physique, and it had a completely different head. I mean, the Lon Chaney wolfman actually looks partially human. This thing, while it struck me as human in terms of physique, its head did not look human. Its head looked more like that god Anubis from Greek mythology, from hieroglyphics. But I didn't think that it was evil. It seemed as if it had a purpose. And thinking back, I think it was hunting, or it was the lookout. So I puzzled on it long and hard for many years. And I don't think I ever got answers until the past year.
Well, I'm glad you're able to connect so many of the dots this past year. That's a good thing. And speaking of its physique, how did its arms compare in length to its body?
Well, that was another funny thing about it. To see the legs appeared longer to his body, but it had a long torso, and it had this V chest, but the arms were shorter. I know they were bent, but I expected much longer arms for it. Maybe it was because of the way the fur on the upper arm was blending in with the fur on the side of the body or something. I don't know, but it seemed like shorter arms, not as short as like you get when you look at T-Rexes and they have those ridiculously short arms, but about 2/3 or 3/4 the length of what you would expect. But then when I was looking at it with 8-year-old eyes, I was looking at it like it was a man, and I was judging it all from a man, not as a cryptozoological unknown species, which I had almost no knowledge of other than the stories my grandmother had told me. And even those, they were considerably different from what I was witnessing. So I don't know what to make. I do know that on the snout, on the upper part of the snout, it was leathery, just like the torso and like the inner part of its arms. But there was no shagginess to the hair, which was interesting to me because later on, most of the movies that you watch, I think, what was it, Silver Bullet? They had a werewolf in that movie, which when I watched that movie, I thought that's fairly similar hair length to what this one had. Maybe the hair on this one laid down a little nicer. It was definitely darker, but similar looking to that, only nowhere near as big. I think the Silver Bullet werewolf is like 7-8 feet, and this thing was under 7 feet as far as I can correctly ascertain, trying to judge everything from almost a 55-year difference in time. So, yeah, trying to think of any other unique anomalies that I noticed on that thing. Just its stealth. The thing that really stood out was its stealth. And it was probably the stealthiest I've ever seen anything move. Unbelievable. Just how smooth and how completely powerful. Wasn't jerky. Wasn't unsteady. Knew exactly what it was doing. Highly intelligent, thinking back on how it moved and how it was able to observe and scan. It had to have incredible vision to be able to see really well, like it appeared to be seeing. It had to have really good hearing in order to hear the slight noise that I made 30 feet away up inside the room. And then also it had to have some kind of intelligence in order not to be distracted by what the sheep were doing. And that was something that also stood out prominently, was the fact that it was not distracted by whatever the sheep were doing. It was focused on doing its thing, whatever its purpose was. But, yeah, definitely got the sense that it was some kind of flesh and blood, though. Like it was a real creature.
From the way you described its posture and its movements and its behavior, it sure sounds to me like maybe there was another dogman out there chasing the sheep and giving them a hard time, but I guess we'll never know. When it stepped out of the shadows and you were able to get a good look at it, was its head proportional in size to its body?
Yes, It was. The head was proportional. The head wasn't bigger. And that was one of the more interesting things. And that also lent it to seem like it was, it was a bigger head than, say, a dog's head. But in comparison to the rest of its body, it was very proportionate, and it actually lent to the human-like appearance of it, even though it was obviously some kind of dog-wolf head on it. The way it held its head, its posture was perfect. It had the best posture. I'm not even sure if I'm right at that time, but I know later on my brothers and I were into lifting weights, and we would get magazines on junior bodybuilding. And back in that day, I'm not sure if Frank Zane had made a name for himself, but I know that in those years I was real aware of who Frank Zane was, because I thought this guy had achieved one of the better physiques that was out there in the bodybuilding kingdom. And I probably would say that if you could take this thing, give 6 inches to Frank Zane and cover him in fur, and even when I look at the way Frank's head sits on his body, he has pretty good posture, he has a pretty strong neck, although Frank's neck is longer than this thing did not have a long neck. It probably had a neck that was a couple inches shorter than a human neck. It was the intelligent look on its face that really made it really hard to understand what I was seeing. At the one hand, I'm looking at this thing that looks like some kind of dog or wolf standing up, and I looked for a tail, and I couldn't tell. Speaking of dog or wolf, I couldn't tell whether or not this thing had a tail. But that was because the back end was kind of in the shadow more, and I looked carefully to see if there was a tail, but then when it would move, I was looking at other things, and I never could define whether or not there was a tail. Though there could have been a tail that was laying flat along its backside down maybe the left-hand leg, and I couldn't see it because it was just blending in, being the same dark fur color in the shadow area of the tree. But that really threw me, looking at this thing and trying to decide, is it human? But if it's human, why does it have a dog's head? At one point, I even thought, is this a human that has a fur coat on with a dog's head mask, or some kind of dog mask on over its head, just because of the way it moved. But then, when I'd look at the feet, the bottom of the legs, threw that right out. That didn't make sense. And I just didn't know what to make of it. It perplexed me for a long time. But, I know it had an emotional impact for me. I should say that it didn't cause me any distress. I was trying to make sense of it, and I was trying to, how come I'm the only person who's ever seen this? And then it wasn't until the internet that I began to realize, other people have seen it, not just one or two other people, but lots of other people have seen this. And not only that, there's more than one type. That really boggles my mind, but makes sense. There's lots of different types of critters out there, and anything could be going on with that entire situation. So, yep.
There's so many things about dogmen that are just so hard to understand. It's almost like you can just take your pick. But besides the sheep that were being killed before you had that encounter, did you ever see or hear anything that made you think some strange creature like that might have been lurking around your property?
Never. I always felt comfortable there. And there were reasons that maybe I shouldn't have felt comfortable there. But I think the fact that it was like my grandfather's place, they were so familiar with it. I had the run of it. I ran all over those hills from morning till night, and only had one interesting situation happen to me. And that was out on the road that ran through the main section slightly off to the right of the 100 acres. And it went over an old bridge, and that old bridge was built back prior to the Civil War. And I had strange feelings there whenever I went near that bridge. We would always dare each other to go look under the bridge. There were stories associated with that bridge. And I think one time we went down and got part way looking under that bridge, and I said, no, I'm coming back up. I'm not going down there. Now, that went over the creek that bordered the north edge of the fields, of that big open area of fields. There was a lot of things going on that property. We knew that it had been an Indian encampment, And I'd found lots of arrowheads, knife points, spear points. I think we even found beads. And I know we found some awls made out of bone. And they were all over this one field that was probably over a 60-acre area. And we would find, especially after plowing would happen, so we'd always walk the fields after the fields were plowed, and there was always arrowheads and whatnot that would turn up. And so I know that this place is ancient, but I always got the feeling that something lived underneath that bridge, and I didn't want to go see it. I never put two and two together with the dog man thing that I'd seen that night and the bridge, but nobody wanted to go underneath that bridge. So that creek is still there to this day, too. And that bridge is almost undoubtedly still there to this day.
You said it never did give you the impression it was evil, of course, talking about that dog man. But did you ever have any lingering problems as a direct result of seeing it?
Well, yeah. As I grew older, like some families, some situations, things happen, tragedies occur. You get wiser. You feel like you start getting a better, unfortunate, realistic view of the world, how the world actually is a dangerous place. And it was after that I went through that kind of maturing that I began questioning just how dangerous that thing might have been. But it took me maturing in order to be able to do that. And in terms of real emotional problems, sure, anything that happens to you that you carry with you is always going to have an effect on your emotions. At least it does for me. But I never felt I was really compromised by it. But I was lucky. I was lucky listening to some of the encounters that I've heard. Mine was pretty benign. I was lucky in the fact that I actually got to observe this thing from a position of relative safety. And also, one of the things that I believe contributed to that is the fact that this thing was young. By listening to all the other encounters and the size of them, this thing was likely a young male. And maybe it just did not have a really mean or vicious disposition. But I felt that that might have had something to do with it, the fact that it was younger and that it was basically doing what it was intending to do. But for all I know, this thing could have done anything. It certainly was powerful enough to. It certainly is not something that I would ever want to meet out in the open without a lot of protection.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't be a good thing. Well, Chaz, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before I have you give us your closing comments, I wanted to share 3 things with the listeners. Number 1, if you've had an encounter of your own and would like to talk with me, it doesn't matter whether you want to come onto the show as a guest or you just want to speak with me in private about your encounter. Please go to dogmanencounters.com, go to the Report Your Encounter page, and submit a report. The second thing I want to share with all of you is I recently posted several new encounters on the Encounters/Sightings page of dogmanencounters.com. The new encounters I posted happened in Gothenburg, Sweden, Lynn County, Iowa, Trumbull County, Ohio, Jackson County, Kansas, Osage County, Kansas, and Minidoka County, Idaho. The last thing I want to share with you is, since I've been receiving so many requests for t-shirts and things like that since I stopped offering them for sale, it's not going to be too long before I've got t-shirts available for sale, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, bumper stickers, posters, and things like that, all for the show. If you have an interest in buying your own Dogman Encounters t-shirt or any of the other things I just mentioned, please keep your eyes posted on the podcast page of dogmanencounters.com. Because once the store is open and ready to go, I'll post a link to the store on the podcast page. All right, Chaz, now that I've got that out of the way, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just that I appreciate the show. Listening to other people's encounters and the way you present it, Vic, has been really good for me. I feel better about what happened way back then. I feel like while it's still almost a bigger mystery, it's less of a confusing mystery. I just feel better about it, and I really appreciate the show, and I appreciate all the other people who come on and share their stories. It's something that I'll continue listening to and trying to figure out just what's going on with those things.
Well, we appreciate you, and we appreciate you taking the time to come on the show tonight and tell us about that experience. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Have a great night.
All right. I will. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.